Okay, there we go. Okay, so I'm starting on Tom's link just to sort of orient us with what I promised. Um, so then we're gonna go right into it. Abstraction in action, from process to paradigm. Um, and so this is the preamble from that link. I don't know if I'll talk for 90 minutes. I want to make this a little more interactive, but there's so much to talk about. My goal at first here is just to get through the basics. Um, so and then we can expand. So I can deliver this stuff I promised. It's essential. Consciousness of abstracting, Korzybski, Bill Sharp, Scott McCloud's visual grammar. These are all the first few slides in a wider presentation. Um, how do we spot bad abstractions or misabstractions in policy, media, discourse? There is a lot of bad abstraction out there. Let me just start there, because that's what abstraction as a tool has helped me evaluate. Like, it's the ultimate kind of epistemology, but it's also very misleading and very slippery. Like, abstraction, what are we talking about? It's not the concrete. It's a representation, right? So it's always going to be problematic. So first things first, we have to define it. The core definition is the etymological one, the linguistic one, where this word comes from, what it means. Um, to draw away from, to draw off, in a double sense of drawing away from the object and to withdraw from the senses. And so you can imagine all of early human history, and a lot of philosophers and cognitive scientists talk about this, what it means to be human. I think John Locke said beasts abstract not, but this is something that's difficult to map into simplistic frames. Some like I'm going to talk about the four quadrants, but something like integral, I think, would try to capture this in a particular stack or set of stages. I'm going to look at it like a 12-layer stack. But my point is, there's always something arbitrary about how we're framing that. It can always be different. So when we make or use an abstraction, we should want it to be very exacting, very consistent. So that brings us to the second definition. It's just another order of abstraction, and way to define it. It's a conceptual process of complexity reduction that highlights the essential properties or first principles of a given object or idea. So that's a fairly universal and like utilitarian definition of the mental process of abstraction. And then a third layer of this concept is it means many different things. So where do we even begin with that? It'll have a different basic definition in math, in computer science, in linguistics, neuroscience, psychology, philosophy, social theory. So I want to try to touch on a lot of those without losing coherence. And then a fourth possible, even more vague, even more abstract, meta abduction, meta abstraction. So that's one way to approach it. Another way is visually. And this is from a book called Understanding Comics, in which there's a lot of great diagrams and explanations. This is one of the simplest ones. This is called the total is the pictorial vocabulary, Scott McCloud calls it. So we have here reality in the bottom left. And then our brains are trying to interface that between language and the picture plane. So in the picture plane, you have all this abstraction in the most symbolic, or fundamental sense, color, shape, form, texture, pattern, breaking down the specifics of reality into those things. So we do it in art. We also do it in ideas, in philosophy, in language. And so I like this because it's blank in the middle. I'll zoom in on the more detailed one where it's all filled in with different comic characters. But I want listeners to meditate for a second on like what can take place in here, not just in the visual sense, but in the intellectual sense, when we're trying to grapple with concepts and interface between reality. We always want to get closer to reality and demystify things, and how that relates to the background of abstraction up here in the picture plane. So, before I get too far ahead of myself, I'll define some of these things um, by way of little detours here. Consciousness of abstraction. This is from Bill Sharp from the Korzybski Institute. And this is an excerpt right off the bat. He starts talking about how what people mostly think of, it's not wrong, but they'll think of abstract as meaning ephemeral, metaphysical, even mystical, or we may think of abstract painting, surrealism, cubism, Picasso. When you Google it, this is certainly the kind of stuff that comes up first, and it's not wrong. There it is, but it's a misdirect. It confuses what the greater depth of abstraction can be. So I have here this kind of meme to say like, let's not get trapped in the abstraction of it, in the shapes, colors, symbols, forms sense, and let's look for definition, precision, utility, function, clarity. Because as he says here, abstract is a multi-ordinal term. It has many meanings, many levels of meaning, and that's key for this. But it's also true for many ordinary things. Like, so multi-ordinal is true for um like abstract things, like we're talking about this concept. But I'll get into a little bit later. Think of something like balls or boxes and how many things that can refer to. How many balls you can think of on the spot, how many different types. So that makes all those things multi-ordinal, having different meanings in different contexts. Um, and he says here, it is absolutely crucial that we comprehend the difference and gain a good appreciation of the full range of abstraction, to be conscious of the process and the effects of abstract thinking. I recommend going and reading this short little chapter slash blog post for this reason. Like I couldn't write a better article. This is one of many of my sources on this concept that gives us a way in. And this is a good way just to show, like in contrast with this abstraction, which is not wrong, it's just different. This is also abstraction. And we're going for more fidelity and veracity. Like this plane's not going to fly if everything's not exact. And I want people to keep in mind some sort of correspondence between this thing's only going to work if it's good abstraction and public discourse as well. Public discourse, when, we're only going to understand each other and functionally work together if the abstractions are sound. And the human body is a great one because there's so many layers to it, so many systems upon systems. The skeletal system, the nervous system, the respiratory system, the circulatory system. We are products of evolutionary abstraction long before we ever have the capacity to think about it. More definition on multi-ordinal there. It's going to very quickly feel like abstraction overload. So, you can get a sense of vertigo. So I want to just give that warning up front. So coming back to here, what else? Yeah, that's about it for that. So the abstraction letter, I think the source's name is Hayakawa, um, but there's many ways you can slice this. This is a classic depiction where the object or the subject is Bessie the cow, source of food, source of animal products, but different orders of abstraction, different meanings, right? Bessie is the individual cow. Even below that, prior to our label and our experience of it, there is just the cow, the the cow in front of us. Um, um, the object of experience that our nervous system abstracts uh, from the totality that constitutes the process cow. Just bear with me. Um, as we go up, we get some specificity, but then it goes into higher categories like what makes all cows cows? And then what makes all of those livestock, where you group in, goats and other things like that. And then farm assets. And then in a higher level, again, an asset. And this is such a great example, right? Because we live in capitalism, hyper capitalism, where everything is, in some sense, reduced to its um, use or exchange value and the pursuit of wealth and wealth itself. Like when you get there, if you get there, um, the rich people, the billionaires, they're not necessarily better ethical abstractors, obviously, but they are abstracting very effectively at business, at the art of war, if you will. Um, and it abstracts them from society as people too. Like they'll become more alienated um, and more powerful, but detached from the concrete because they have all this money. So I don't want to get too off track on that, but the latter is important because we should always look at everything through this lens, that it's on a continuum of labels and uses. So this one is 8 rungs, but I think a better one is 12. And this is where the idea of, my subtitle from process to paradigm is going to be salient. Um, so primordial abstraction, and it's important that it's called abstraction, even though there's no thinking per se, but it's stuff we've broken down as through science, chemistry, physics, into patterns, into symmetry, into laws that it's very reliable. It's very, the periodic table. We know what these things are now. And the, gravity, the way solar systems and stars and planets form, that's all primordial. And then it gives way to biological abstraction, that gives way to neurological abstraction, to behavioral. So let's have more fun with it and look at it in this visual stack. Um, I built this app. We're going to talk a little bit about vibe coding, but primordial, right? We can break it down: ecological interactions, evolutionary processes, homeostasis and regulation, cellular structures, genetic encoding, and in each one, I generated some more sublayers. So ecological interactions, symbiosis, food webs. We're able to zoom in and out of these different layers very easily through this sort of conceptual stack. And this has been critical for me, so I don't lose sight of what level, what order of abstraction I'm talking about. Sometimes it's something specific, uh, like like this, and we know what we're doing. or this, but um, the more complex reality is something like this. And of course, when you get up to these very human layers, conceptual, theoretical, sociopolitical, right? A lot of this is socially constructed. One of my favorite examples of how we reify abstraction is in borders, right? So look at a map, right? None of that is real in the reality sense. It's social reality, real. We make it, we enforce it with guards, with checkpoints, with processes, but it's in reality amenable and it like changeable, and it should be like part of the global crisis we're in is that abstraction has gotten ahead of us. We have no handle on it. It rules our lives. It always has. But the better we understand it, the more we, I said earlier, demystify, but the more we, um, just stay grounded. Like the world is full of like true believers, of flat earthers and conspiracy theorists, and it's only fun to a very short, shallow point. Like it's really dangerous at the end of the day. Um, and those are easy examples to debunk, but there's so many things replete with nuance that we can't agree on. Here's, global health and pandemics, epidemiology. Like if I had more here, I don't right now, but this could endlessly be expanded to be an educational tool. Um, um, so yeah, to be continued on that angle. We'll come back to that if necessary, but I wanna move along. Uh, this is a fun example. Okay, I'm gonna have to let me try this. Okay, I wanted to start with a blank screen here to sort of make this a thought experiment. So I mentioned balls and boxes earlier. Just as a demonstration of how quickly we can get into very high numeration or enumeration of abstract objects, think of a ball, right? Here's a couple examples. Uh, how many can you think of off the top of your head? Ping pong ball, billiard ball, the sun, the planets. They're all different sizes of balls, but they all have, except for the football there, they're all spheres. They're all spheroid. They're made of different materials. They have different functions. These are all sports balls. Um, how many can you think of? Right? That's an interesting, albeit childish, kind of thought experiment to start being conscious of your own thinking. Okay, what about boxes, right? And these are very platonic shapes. Um, um, we got here building blocks, dice, ice cube, Rubik's cube, cardboard box, Lego. Um, there's more. If I zoom in here, now I've added this, we can break down just the concept of what I'm trying to show. Um, just to supplement our thinking. Oh, cultural social. Oh yeah, there's masquerade ball, debutante ball, cannonball run. And under cubes, boxes, Pandora's box, soap box, Jack in the box. Um, so it's really endless and expansive. And um, if I zoom back out here, um, if we were to brainstorm, and perhaps with the help of AI, we could come up with, say, 500 to 1,000 examples of each of things that are sphere or ball like or cube and box like. And I think that's interesting to demonstrate this enumerative abstraction because language is super messy like this. We're abstracting all the time. You're listening to me, you're abstracting, you're thinking. Um, and this stuff applies to concepts just as much as objects. That's what I'm trying to demonstrate with this particular slide. So that's all there is for that. Now we'll get into the quadrant stuff a little bit. Um, this is sociologist George Ritzer. He puts the macro objective in the top left, which is going to throw a lot of integral people, but it's essential. But I'm also gonna. This is the more classic subjective interior, um, subjective micro interior individual. This is a more standard approach that puts the individual first. But just keep in mind there the difference in terms of the impact of how we frame these things. So abstractions in each. I made this a few years back and called it integral abstraction, but I just, even very few social theorists get this. The classical framing is that mental abstraction is the main definition, but then along comes Marx and later Sohn-Rethel, who said, well, what if there is abstraction other than thought? What work can we make this word do? And he called it real abstraction. So that would be down in this quadrant. So framing it that way though is only two sides of four quadrants. Like it's still a limited framework, but that's how a lot of social theorists are operating. There is an increasing amount in the literature that talk about social abstraction and sociological and how that is relevant, and less on the physical, but there is some as well. So it's all out there, and what I've tried to do is just tie it together. So I'm going to jump from this straight to this app. This is Abstract Analyzer. Let's go. Oh, hold on. Sorry. So I got to exit the presenter view. Sorry, hold on. Okay. Um, so there's some different content in these quadrants than what I was just showing, but it's more or less the same. So abstraction in the subjective is cognition, metacognition, spirituality. In the physical, it's these biological processes and also praxis to some extent. And in the intersubjective, memes, narratives, ideologies, epistemic justice, and in the interobjective, economic systems, political systems, tech. And now we're already at the point, it's a bit early, but I think we're going to be talking about this for a long time. Vicious versus virtuous abstraction. So the term virtuous abstraction doesn't really exist. I'm coining it. Vicious abstraction does exist. William James sort of defined it, and I think other people have as well, but it comes from his basic definition. And we will get to that here. I'll flip back and forth a little bit, but James's definition is basically a fallacy where an idea or concept is taken out of its original context. And even in a simpler example is a quote taken out of its context, which happens all the time. It happens unintentionally. It happens on purpose. And as we're going to see, like it's a big part of the culture war. I've written on this. I'm trying not to go backwards into what I've already written and published. There's 15 to 20 articles on abstraction that I've written, vicious abstraction being one of them. But I'm trying to speak from the cutting edge here and keep moving forward, because a lot of this stuff is more alive, frankly, than in going back to the articles. So taking it out of context, simplifying to the point where its original meaning is distorted or lost. Abstractions that hide essential complexity while introducing spurious precision. And just off the top of my head, right, my favorite examples are Marxism, feminism, postmodernism, all the things we heard Jordan Peterson and the intellectual dark web crybullying and rage whining about because they didn't understand. And complexity is a key word here. So is systems, because, I recall specific episodes where Peterson and conservative pundit Andrew Sullivan were like, systemic racism isn't real because there's no systems. And, what's a system? Oh, I'm so confused. Everybody spoon feed me. Um, there are systems. There's ordinary racism and there's institutional racism or systemic racism or structural racism. So when people talk about those things from a place of not understanding, um, it's vicious and it has vicious effects. And there's many ways we can slice this. It reifies slogans, swaps vibes for verification. Whereas before I move on, like, what is virtuous abstraction? And how can we be so sure in all cases? I don't mean to oversimplify, right? Because I think there is a middle ground, there's a nuance. I also have a spectrum somewhere here for um, that virtuous versus vicious itself. Um, to show that there's an in between. So I won't be able to necessarily find it. Um, so I want to go back to this. So virtuous, the goal is clarity, synthesis, emancipation, consensus. The process is revealing complexity, showing connections, drawing a way to see the whole, um, multi-ordinal, reflexive, dialectical, um, the ethos, outcome, examples. Um, the more we have here, the more we do actually come to think in like black and white terms. And this can be good. This is what I want to highlight. But yeah, there's also nuance and we can get things wrong. But imagine if people could just agree already on this, coming from whatever background, just look at this and go, oh yeah, yeah, lying, misrepresenting something, that's probably not good. You know, maybe I should know what I'm talking about before I speak, or I should be ready to be challenged, or we should have a mediator, outsource to someone else. So good examples of vicious abstraction, racist dog whistles, thought leaders selling simple solutions, greenwashing, corporate jargon. And again, when we call them abstractions, it's because they present as what they're trying to look like structurally. So corporate jargon is going to be based on like legitimate jargon. Like pseudoscience copies science. Pseudoscience tries to imitate and look like science. So for most people, even some scientists, they can't tell the difference. And that's dangerous. When you can't tell the difference, we got to zoom out. We got to audit it from all these different angles. So virtuous versus vicious. Um, this is one way to make a methodology out of that called paradoxical praxis. Paradoxity is a term I use in a anti-intellectualism article. It's like a portmanteau of paradox and complexity. Um, Step one, deconstructive mapping. We kind of been over that a little bit, the quadrants and the definitions. Step two, abductive synthesis. After taking the problem apart, creatively reassemble the pieces. Convert. Step three, convergent action. Um, so after we've done the ideational prototyping, the inference to the best explanation, let's um, consensus build. Let's embody it as a way of life. Um, right? So we're trying to foster this with virtuous abstraction. Okay, this part is a little bit interactive. If people want to drop um, ideas in the comments, please do, and we will just generate a response in real time. This is using an AI backend, and it will give us quadrant analysis, and it'll give us constitutive praxis suggestions. So, and I see a question there: is a balloon a ball? Sure. I mean, some balloons are more ball than others, like a yoga ball is an inflated ball. It's spherical, right? A balloon that you tie off won't be a perfect sphere, but that's um, what we're getting at with imagining abstraction. So, okay, let me go just put in a random idea while we're waiting. If anyone has any ideas, political economy of the culture war. Analyze. And then I'll also talk about a little bit these foundational thinkers of abstraction. So the concept of political economy of the culture war posits seemingly ideological or identity-based cultural conflicts um, are not autonomous, but deeply intertwined with and driven by underlying economic structures, power dynamics, and material interests. So first, we just get a basic definition, answer. Um, the classifications, whether it's virtuous or vicious, are going to vary when I phrase a question like that or a prompt like that. It's not a question that leads to a clear answer. So in this case, it's virtuous um, because it's talking about the study of it, right? The If I phrase it differently, like what billionaires are doing through the political economy of the culture war, like Peter Thiel, for example, what he's doing, extremely vicious, extremely vicious. So, at any rate, what do we do with it? Constitutive praxis suggestion. To engage with the political economy of the culture war, we must follow the deconstruct, synthesize, act, um, deconstruct culture war narratives by meticulously tracing their material origins and exposing the economic and political interests they serve, rather than accepting them at face value as purely ideological. So this is a difficult move to do, but it's what a lot of leftists do all the time, and it involves tracing in unambiguous ways, like the money flows, and money is abstraction in itself, but also what is the ideological abstraction that is piggybacking all of that money, right? Like when we think of the Israel lobby, APAC, and all that used to be called American Zionist lobby. Um, Vicious. So that framing is vicious, or what Thiel is doing is vicious. What Thiel is doing is vicious, David. Thiel is misrepresenting the culture war. He's misrepresenting social theory, and he's got a nakedly anti-human agenda with his wealth. Um, and he owns Palantir, but look at the CEO of Palantir, Alex Karp, like just acidic discourse there, like literally Orwellian, and just wants to like kill protesters with drones. So we're getting very far from reality when we let these people and Trumpism dictate what's going on, and they're using all of that discourse to mask what they're actually doing with policy. Like Project 2025 is behind all that. So I'm going to move on a little bit here. Um, the top 9 of these people were actually from a conference that Conrad Hamilton organized earlier this year because he's an expert on real abstraction. So these are all experts on real abstraction. And I analyzed that. And then Jeff Sharp, Derek Sayer, Benjamin Bratton were not part of that, but they are key thinkers on abstraction. Sayer writes about the violence of abstraction. Jeff Sharp writes about constitutive abstraction, which is to do with really unpacking intellectual labor and how abstraction works in the world, how we constitute it, and how it constitutes us. And it's building off Sohn Rethel's idea of real abstraction. Benjamin Bratton, I have found, has been the biggest picture thinking sociologist scholar, as he's talked about it basically from the primordial all the way down to, or all the way up, if you will, to the speculative. And that's where I get ideas like this, and we can crystallize them. So let me come back to this. There's actually a lot here. Just going each row will give more detail on the right panel here as I click it. Core move, felt sense, map versus territory. Vicious abstraction is the map replaces the terrain, cherry picks facts, and can be instrumentalized or weaponized in counterproductive ways. In virtuous abstraction, the map is an instrument, updates with feedback, grounds truth. And just coming back to the flat Earth thing for a minute, Google Earth is the highest fidelity abstraction we have of our planetary reality, right? And you can toggle between layers. Like this expression, the map is not the territory, which comes from Korzybski, is ironically insufficient because at a certain point, the map becomes almost more real than the territory. Almost. I mean, it never will be completely, but we can see and feel and measure the fidelity of what we're working with. It's self-evident in a way, right? Like Google Earth is self-evident, and you can zoom into like a street view almost anywhere on the planet. That's that's the frontier of technological abstraction, is it not? The use of liminality or fliminality. The vicious exploits thresholds, ambiguity as a weapon, keeps terms blurry as a flip point. Virtuous is tends those thresholds, names flip conditions. Liminality, after all, is that edge. Epistemic posture, scale fit. Like, there's a lot of interesting ways to slice this. Time horizon, institutional form. And again, none of this comparative model really existed before. As I say, there's no definition of virtuous abstraction. And we're wading into very ambitious territory to say that there is and there can be. But that's what I believe in a paradigm shift. I believe that we're not there yet, but we can keep pushing and these things will start to make more sense. And coming back to the culture war, like this stuff outsmarts us, right? A lot of debates wouldn't even have to happen or could be resolved instantly if we had some form, some verification framework. Clearly, integral theory and the integral community fail at this regularly because they have maps and models that routinely fail to produce consistent and verifiable and interobjective outcomes and analysis, right? And so you'll while I'm working with these layers, you won't hear me talking about like blue, green, yellow, teal, or any kind of euphemisms um, that are reifying and collapsing the intended meaning of those different layers, or coming back to this idea of orders of abstraction. Well, all those layers actually mean different things in different contexts. Um, so, moving on um, to yet another way to abstract knowledge. Um, there's other versions of this, just like there is with the Maslow's hierarchy. There's more updated, newer ones, but there's a lot of fetishization and whatnot around wisdom. And somewhere here, I have a note on the explosion of knowledge. We'll get to that. But we have to keep in mind we have more data, more information, more collective knowledge than we've ever had before. So why is the world so dumb? Why is politics, why does it look like Idiocracy, the movie, or Team America World Police, right? We really have a lot of leakage in abstraction. In computer science, they talk about leaky abstractions. But I think the key here is to understand that that is happening with philosophical and sociological and everyday abstraction. So like any of these models, right, they're only so useful insofar as you dive into it. You We're continually trying to become better scientists, right? Like, oh, well, what is data? Where am I getting a data set? How am I interpreting it? Um, how am I going up and down the levels of this pyramid, if you will? Um, the proof is in the pudding. We need to be able to like convince each other of nuanced truths and converge up here, if you will, in actual wisdom, ending war, genocide, homelessness, mental illness. So that's that. I don't want to dwell on that model too much. Here's another model, right? And by the way, anybody in these spaces giving talks are relying heavily on abstraction. And this is why we want to be able to audit it way better. I like this one, right? So what I'm getting at is with the model, I mean, there's 1,000. Um, but why change fails, right? This is the Lippitt-Noster model. Successful change, according to this, requires all of these things: vision, consensus, skills, incentives, resources, and an action plan. If you don't have any of them, it fails for different reasons. And I love this because no vision leads to confusion. Well, sidebar, the Fliminal Web, the different sense-making communities we've been a part of. There's a handful of terms, overlapping networks, and people. A lot of visionary discourse, no real vision leads to confusion. No consensus, which is something I've written on and am passionate about, consensus building. It takes effort, but it's worth the effort. Sabotage is going to be the outcome. No skills, anxiety. No incentives, resistance. And that's an important one too, because people don't necessarily see the incentives for consensus building, but so they resist. So, I want people to think as I'm going through this, like, does anybody object to this model? This is not my model. I think it's great. No resources, frustration. I can relate to that. That's part of the reason I fail. No action plan, false starts. So we got a lot of that. We got a lot of this failure. And that's interesting to unpack. I don't have much more to say about that. But I just thought it was a good abstraction. It's doing a lot of work in a very simple diagram. Same thing here. This one's taken from the context of education, pedagogy, transformative and mutual learning. Each layer is nested within the previous, right? So everything starts with understanding, then recognizing, then engaging. Um, so I'm going to breeze by that. The Abstract Society, one of my favorite finds ever, because it was published in 1970. And, I'd never been taught any of this stuff on abstraction explicitly. I recognized that there was a ton of research out there, but there was a kind of opportunity and a void where that stuff was not organized into a paradigm. That's what I'm trying to do, trying to take it from process to paradigm. And books like this are key in the literacy of that journey. Um, Here's an excerpt. In every modern industrial state, more and more individuals find themselves confronting and revolting against an abstract entity, the system or the establishment, which seems to rule their lives. I love that because we all still talk about the system, but we don't talk about the abstraction element. We don't talk about what history looks like in terms of abstraction from the 18th century, say, to the 19th, to the 20th. The abstraction in the modern sense becomes particularly more salient in these times, 50s, 60s, 70s, because of the proliferation of media, of TV, of the Cold War, of capitalism, of neoliberalism. Behind the scenes, if you will, all those things are doing real abstraction, which is not well understood. And Ziderveld, for example, breaks it down to these different dimensions. He sees, like, okay, what does that mean? The abstraction of society. Well, more alienation, which Marx talked about, more segmentation, more bureaucratization, right? More red tape, more paperwork, more desk jockeys, more institutionalization, more norms come along with that, more formalities, more procedures, rationalization, autonomization, commercialization, nationalization. These are abstractions that people participate in, especially nationalism. Right? And it keeps us, those abstractions can be useful, but they're ultimately trapping. Like uh, a nation is an imagined community. Um, so there's a lot of work. And coming back to at the beginning, Korzybski, consciousness of abstraction. How aware are you of your own thought processes, your own infrastructure of that? Like, what was your education, or are you an autodidact? Like, are you an artist? How is that expressing itself? Um, and just as an example of another book, this is a book that really, really impacted me, changed me a lot. I think it came out in 2015. It's called Inventing the Future, but it might as well have been called Abstracting the Future. That's my takeaway. There's over 100, probably a couple hundred um, times the word abstract comes up in this. And it's all talking about what I'm talking about capitalism, how it rules abstractly, how domination is exercised via these systems. Um, and the authors, who are leftists, want to um, like revitalize and reclaim abstraction as a thinking process, as a social process, so we can understand it better and we can stop or reverse all of these negative abstraction, these vicious abstractions that dominate society. Um, here's a part of the summary. Anti-abstraction weakens the left, right? So folk political impulses, immediacy, localism, presentism. We need to embrace those things, and you'll hear some thinkers focusing on them a lot. But it's very easy to go too far, even with the right intentions, right? I just read a communist article about how lived experience is not always a reliable uh, tool. Now, we never want to censor that or ignore it, but it's nothing is reducible to that, right? So we need good abstraction to overcome that, to integrate that. And this is a good book in that direction. These are a couple quotes I pulled from The Open Conspiracy by H.G. Wells. Great book in my conspiracy work, which is a different subject, different discourse. Um, there's a lot of great sources like this, and you can see how it ties into abstraction. You can see random writers and social theorists using abstraction in this way to talk about money, to talk about the value of a map lies in the fact that it is not a model nor a picture of reality, but a reduced abstraction, sufficiently clear and sufficiently true to uh, sorry, I don't know, might be a typo. Um, Sufficiently true and free from irrelevancies so it can guide us. And just quick note on that book, like the open conspiracy, um, very ahead of its time, is a counterpoint to how we typically perceive conspiracies as closed. And systemic conspiracy is real. That's a topic for another day. But we need to understand how abstraction is operating in that. So all of that is just prelude to this idea of sociological abstraction, abstraction, culture war, and political normativity. I say abstraction is not neutral. It is both the condition of possibility for thought and action and a terrain of struggle where ideas, identities, and institutions are contested. And the culture war is at bottom, if we zoom out, a war of abstractions. Words, categories, policies, beliefs, and narratives that shape how we perceive reality and decide what counts as normal and desirable or intolerable. That gives way, circling back, I know we already talked about this, vicious versus virtuous abstraction. Virtuous simplifies without falsifying. Vicious pretends to be universal while serving narrow interests. And again, coming back to consciousness of abstracting, as written about by Bill Sharp, this one paragraph stuck out to me because it says, what happens when we misuse abstractions? In the simplest terms, just about everything, every bad thing we can imagine, from stress to insanity to crime to war, can happen. Higher order abstractions, and we're doing this all the time as philosophers, can produce vague thoughts resulting in unsubstantiated opinions, causing irresolvable conflict. Higher order abstractions have a psychoneural effect on the nervous system. And not all higher order abstractions, right? Keep in mind the context in this paragraph. We're talking about the misuse of abstractions. It can lead to psychoneural effect on the nervous system. Um, Otherwise known as somatic, psychosomatic caused. Um, I, 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 I can't, I hate to say Peterson again, but I can't not link it to obvious examples. You know, his daughter just said he's sick and in a coma because of demons or something like that. You know, that it's bad mojo, it's self-induced. And I think it's a bit of both. I think when we see the psychosis of that man unravel, this is why. He's somebody who has written about abstraction in what I think is an interesting way. Credit where it's due. But he is really bad at it in other ways and really vicious. So, anyways, moving on. It affects the nervous system, is what Sharp is saying. Deeply affects the lower centers. Produce the effects Korzybski called identification, disturbances in evaluation, confusion of orders of abstraction. In short, it can cause mental dysfunction, including insanity. We see that with fundamentalism and cults. The more you buy in to those abstractions and build your life and your community about it, the greater the risk. So we always want to zoom in and out of these layers of abstraction. Um, I said there was no virtuous abstraction precedent, but when you Google it, I found these sorts of things. This is um, the word's not there, but it was in the original article, right? So the upward recovery process is the virtuous version. This is to do with urban living, managing the stress of living in a city. Um, so you can be stressed from it. And I was living in the city, and um, it can send you into a downward spiral. And alternatively, to recover, you need some good environment and structure and exposure therapy to reintegrate with that. And so this source from social psychiatry talks about that. This is in the context of just how you feel about yourself. Vicious cycle. Oh, I'm not good enough. Compare myself to others. Oh, I don't belong. Compensate and have negative feelings. Um, Judgmental, feel lonely, isolate, repeat. So it's a downward spiral. It's vicious. Virtuous is the opposite. Um, you get the idea. And here's an example in the context of logistics. Um, this is a little bit problematic, a little bit with respect to what I'm talking about in ethics and epistemology, because it's just saying, this is just saying, oh, good logistics is virtuous and bad logistics is vicious. But what work is that doing, right? In capitalism, we still have a lot to unpack about logistics itself and supply chains and where that goes wrong, right? Where there's regulatory capture, where there's moral hazards. But I just wanted to show you there is a precedent for this thinking, but no one has thought about it in terms of abstraction itself. And so I didn't even get through all of that, but that's fine. Um, just want to zoom in on this map because this is the one slide that I have that kind of shows what I mean by that spectrum. It's not simply vicious or virtuous. There's an in between. There's a neutral right in the middle there. But at the bottom, we have deceptive, virtuous abstraction, which in terms of these are the categories: motive abstraction, cognitive behavior, ethical, political, and cultural war example. Let me just focus on the culture war example. On the bottom level, vicious abstraction, you have white genocide myth, QAnon, Great Replacement, which is the white genocide thing, flat earth revival, Holocaust denial. Slightly up from that, we have sloganistic thinking, build the wall, defund the police. Um, and I'm fond of defund the police, by the way. Let's be clear about that. But it's clearly a limited frame. It's problematic. It lends itself to being inverted and denied and misrepresented, unfortunately. So you can see the tug of war of abstraction just in these terms we use. Do Black Lives Matter or do all lives matter? Do we defund the police or do we fund social services and society? Um, Coming up from that, culture war punditry, right? These are low level vicious abstractions. Uh, ESG capitalism. Um, Forget what it's environment, sustainability, sort of thing, diversity training, Like these are the, we're approaching the kind of mainstream neoliberal band-aid solutions, um, greenwashing is in there somewhere. Uh, Superficial abstraction, right below neutral, is where we get all this culture war stuff. Um, Anyways, as we move up, we have this um, centrist or neutral, let's say. It's not entirely neutral, obviously, but equality before the law, free market as efficient coordination, personal responsibility. These are very common memes or tropes, if you will. We all believe in to some degree, even if you're anti-capitalist. And as I'm arguing, as we go higher into reflective and then integrative abstraction, virtuous abstraction, luminal abstraction, if you will, and forgive the indulgence there, but these are the terms that we come up with. A lot of this is just generated. It can be modified, of course. Um, and a lot of this reflects my ongoing dialectic working relationship with AI, right? Because I wrote about humanizing AI years ago, and the message of that is how, you know, just as it says, we need to remain in control of AI. Uh, but sometimes AI knows better. We've already crossed that Rubicon, right? So it's a dance. At any rate, let me finish the line of thinking here. Intersectional feminism, restorative justice. These are climate justice. These are virtuous abstractions because they make sense. They're true. They have positive ethical implications. Truth and reconciliation frameworks, post-capitalist eco-social democracy, peace, industrial design, etc. So it is a spectrum. It's messy, but it doesn't have to be mystified. Um, Very quickly, we're not talking about metamodernism today, but there are three major schools, and they have, this could also be a Venn diagram, and I visualized it other ways, um, such as this. But um, I'm not going to go into that. I'm just going to say this is an abstraction. This is one abstraction I made, and so is this, and it uh, is intended to foster clarity and veracity and stimulate critical thinking. So well, I think we're doing good for time. Just a few more keyframes to get through, and then I'll zoom out. Um, right here, the word vicious cycle. This is why I included this. This is a kind of vicious versus virtuous framing, and it's interesting. Here's our starting point. If we have leadership that does not respect individuals or lead with humility, and that leadership emphasizes command and control, we're going to get poor quality because of this cycle. And um, this is to do with organizational dynamics. Um, so take it in that context, but leads to low customer satisfaction. We're not customers when it comes to ideas. I don't want anyone to get that idea, but I think this is a useful, again, abstraction. It may be flawed. It may be used in different ways. Um, Consequences, reduced profit margin, like, with ideas and truth and justice, we're not talking about profit margin. So it's a different language, a different discourse, but, there it is anyways. So, okay, this is kind of where I want to tie off things. Oh, we got so many more slides to go with. Um, Abstraction meta theory. This is actually I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because I want to get into the more interactive Q&A part with who's here. But the top left there, it's a bit hard to read. It says matter and energy. So across this row, it's kind of directional, starts with perception, sensing matter, and it ends with engineering as enactment. So computational physics kind of there in the middle. I mean, make of it what you will, but this is a great way to zoom out and have a map of abstraction. But yeah, when I say I want to end with this, I started talking about this stack there. Actually, I'll just go here. This stack. This is a different stack. This is types of abstraction less based on that stack because these all kind of take place in the socio cultural conceptual layers. But these are the major, everything I've set up to this point has been more or less introductory. This is the more advanced stuff. Um, there's 11 forms here. Already touched on some of these names, but each major form has a major domain, has a major function, potential risk, and emancipatory potential. So relating to my metamodern politics talk, there's a way to organize this, give it a score if you want. And that's what this does. If I click this tab, you can show how they're scored immediately. This one is already ordered, or no, it's not ordered. Okay, now it is. If I click that. So at the very bottom of this list of examples, we have climate denial abstraction. It obscures responsibility and ecological limits. And this has been written about. I wrote about the abstraction of pollution, abstraction of water. Many people have written about climate denial as abstraction. Financial abstraction typically has negative associations because who does it benefit? What does it do? What does it function as? Each one of these has their own card, right? So we could dive in. Who are the major thinkers? David Harvey. What's the domain context? What's the risk mitigation? What's the emancipatory potential? Yeah, I didn't want to talk about this. I didn't want to start here because it's quite advanced, in my opinion. Abstract society. The risks, it requires countermeasures. The opportunity, is lending to critical awareness. What are the practical applications? Critiquing bureaucratic alienation, advocating for human scale institutions, resisting rationalization, preserving life world, against system colonization. So there's a lot of detail here, a lot of different conceptual foundations, the real abstraction, cartographic, spatial, algorithmic, scientific. Some of these overlap a lot. There's redundancy that was not necessary. That's how we got from originally 11 in this to I added a few more last night because I could, we can generate those things. So this is all like projects in motion too. Like this stuff can keep evolving beyond this point. Since I've been going for over an hour, I do want to kind of take a pause, see if anybody has any questions. Can zoom out to the big picture. I was telling Tom before we got started, I had a screenshot folder that I found these all just in a row. So I pasted them all. They're just random pages from different social theory and whatnot that discusses abstraction. And I have a lot of that. And I was telling Tom, like, I can take all these images, drop it into an LLM, and it'll read them all. And, you can do whatever you want with that. But abstraction is everywhere. And I actually have a kind of mystical knack, if you will, that this happens to me a lot. I'll pick up a book, I'll flip through it. It can be any book, and I come upon the word abstract. It's kind of synchronicity. And that's one of the things that was made me think like, wow, this is everywhere. And I know what it means. We all know what it means on a very simple level. But what does it mean like in the transcendent sense, in the absolute? What does it mean in all these different contexts, all these different fields? Um, I didn't even talk about this, but there's this book called What's What, and it's a visual glossary of the physical world. So it takes anything you could imagine and just breaks it down into its constituent elements with labels. And I think this is how we learn as we are um, young people, children being enculturated into the world. Um, you could call this nominalism, just naming everything, but it's so important. It has so much salience. And I found this book at a thrift store, not this edition, but same book. And I just love it because it illuminates different forms of abstraction. This is another similar thing. I have this book, Human Dimension and Interior Space. And it's like, what if the Vitruvian Man was its own textbook? And in the context of ergonomics, like not just what is the shape of a human being, but what is the shape of the environments that we design. So that's all there in a book like that. I love that stuff. Here we have a sort of executive summary of my abstraction paradigm. I just threw the PDF in there. If you have questions, just throw them in. What else? So yeah, there's all that. I'll end with this just for fun because this is a meta crisis, global meta crisis tracker simulator that is in development, and obviously it's a way of abstracting a particular thing. It's not Google Earth. It's custom. It's a custom aesthetic. It's custom function to focus on these meta crisis things and how they're interrelated. And yeah, more to come on that as I build out the database. Oh, we don't want to see that. That's a lecture for another day. Um, oh, how about this? If anyone has any ideas, this is also a tool I built. Let's look at, let's just say manufacturing consent as a seed concept. It's the title of a book, of course, but what this does, it's going to generate a node with 5 limbs, if you will. Okay, manufacturing consent. Well, here it's all these things. It's propaganda techniques. It's media monopoly and information control. It's consumer culture and manufactured desires. Role of social media. Let's just take one. Let's take media monopoly and information, and zoom in on it. Double click it. It's going to give us a definition, and it's also going to generate more nodes. Explore how media ownership concentrates impacts the diversity of viewpoints and narrative framing. And so under media monopoly, we have grassroots journalism as a counterbalance, algorithmic gatekeeping, influence of media oligarchies. Fox News comes to mind. Regulatory policies. So you can just influence of media oligarchies. You could just, infinitely dive in almost like a Wikipedia kind of format into deeper and deeper orders and categories of abstraction. Is slop, Alan says, is slop an example of vicious abstraction? Short answer, yes, I guess. Um, it could be neutral, it could be entertaining. Um, Slop, um, certainly. The short answer is, yeah, we could probably unpack that, but I think it's kind of obvious what's implied there. Slop is slop. I'm finding that discourse fascinating. Like it's easy to generate, and it's everywhere now. It's ubiquitous. Whether it's text generation or image generation, there's this idea of flooding the zone with low coherence information. Um, or if nothing else, like it could have coherence, but it's a slurry. It's taking ideas and blending them, hence the kind of slop you get. So, what we do with that slop also can have virtuous or vicious outcomes. Um, what else? Oh, I meant to start off with this too. Just Googling it, a few weeks ago, I found three articles, one on Coursera, what is abstract thinking and how to cultivate it. Scroll down, visualizing, comparison, criticism, imagination, philosophy, prediction, problem solving. There it is. You don't need me to teach that level of it because it's everywhere. Why abstract thinking is the cognitive superpower we keep underrating. That sounds like a good article. Why does every intelligent visionary use abstract and symbolic reasoning in their innovative thinking? Another good one. So, that's out there. That's the kind of hook, I think. If you want to learn to think better, you got to work on it. It's an endless process, but it's also just the beginning because abstraction is all this, you know. Um, so again, what I want people to take away, and as we move into a discussion, like how are we iteratively vetting our own personal and our collective abstraction to get closer to truth? Because we live in a post-truth time and era and context, but that is contrived. That is manufactured, right? Because we have more knowledge than we've ever had. So, um, inevitably, oh, here's the knowledge curve. We have more knowledge than ever. And this is from a different website. This is Ralph Kenyon of Xenodoki, great source. But he says, oh, Korzybski is actually out of date. He was writing in 1933. Um, Knowledge growth actually tracks with Moore's law. Um, so not only do we have an explosion of computer power, we have an explosion of knowledge, an overwhelming amount. In fact, we need to distill it and abstract it back down to make sense of it. But I want to highlight this so people understand how can we be so dumb when there is so much knowledge? Um, so yeah, so the takeaway I want people to have, of course, is this idea of epistemic humility, which has been much talked about, but that I don't think is effectively practiced enough. Like we can be epistemically humble, but and also have convictions at the same time. So keeping all this in mind and keeping in mind the ethical and epistemological dimensions, we can have better abstraction. Um, and that's part of the reason I'm doing it here with Tom on Tom's platform is to hone my teaching skills, but also like encourage self-auditing And a lot of people, they're not going to do it themselves, but in these fliminal spaces, there's a mix. There's a lot of good thinking, a lot of smart people, and and there is some vicious abstraction trickled throughout that. Um, so I think through, abstraction is the problem and it's the solution. It always comes back to that kind of irony. Um, yeah. So should I stop sharing and we'll kind of go, oops, kind of go into the like face talking mode? Um, okay, stop.